What do you fear? The dark? Loneliness? Maybe even yourself? The 2001 cult classic Cat Soup explores many different iterations of fear and existentialism. It puzzled audience members in ways that go beyond the typical interpretations of what is considered weird in anime. And that should say something considering some of the output from Japan, but you haven't seen anything quite like this. As different as it may seem though, it's a film that still somehow manages to speak universally, using a few clever tricks. There is no dialogue in the film, the story is told purely through its animation and imagery. Simply giving you a plot synopsis cannot do the story justice. Not only would that undermine the gorgeous visuals, but what's more important to Cat Soup is not necessarily the basic plot, but rather the thematic elements. What may seem cruel and nonsensical at first actually adds up to a cohesive narrative. The main theme of Cat Soup is the passage of time. Throughout the film, we see many instances of death and reincarnation. This is to emphasize the fact that time is always moving forward. But as the clock keeps ticking, even the mundane can become horrifying. We see Nyako and Nyata as mischievous rascals traversing through the lands, though in reality they are constantly being chased by the Grim Reaper himself. Death is imminent, and that's one of the major universal languages of Cat Soup. Death is what ties us all together. It's a grim reality we must all face someday, and this film is not afraid to remind you of that. It is equally terrifying as it is genius. Okay, maybe that's a little too heavy. This is a movie called Cat Soup after all. Its depiction of life isn't always the most optimistic, but at the end of the day, it's just a cartoon. If you want to see what Cat Soup looks like in real life, just take a trip on over to YouTube. Here you'll find some truly epic videos on how to make cat soup, so let's have a look.
Step 1. Clean your hands. Hygiene is very important. Step 2. We need to kill the cat. Stupid cat. Take so long to die. Tastes like cat shit and dog shit mixed together.
On second thought, let's get back to the OVA because there's a lot to talk about regarding its staff and history. Meet Tatsuo Sato, the director. He's a smaller name in the industry, but hit it big with Martian Successor Nadesico in the mid-90s. While popular at the time, nowadays it tends to get a little overlooked, which unfortunately is the case for many of his anime. Stellvia also had some buzz at the time of its release, but it's also not as widely known now as it used to be. The Ninja Scroll TV series just kind of got overshadowed and isn't as fondly remembered as the movie. And I suppose Shigofumi would have to be his most popular and acclaimed anime in the Western community these days. So while he can be a bit hit or miss, it's still a shame he doesn't get more recognition because his projects and concepts are always interesting. Especially in Nadesico. Very best girl. Even so, it's actually a miracle we got any of these shows in the first place because Sato entered the industry essentially by chance. He actually started out studying law at Waseda University. However, after being concerned about not being able to tie his own tie, he reconsidered his entire career. Sato wanted a job where he could be kind of scruffy. At this point he would also get into watching movies. 1977's Powers of 10 by Charles and Ray Eames in particular would have a profound impact on the young Sato. It starts with a shot of a couple at a picnic in Chicago. We get to see more of the city as the camera zooms out, eventually taking us into the far reaches of outer space.
This lonely scene, the galaxies like dust, is what most of space looks like. This emptiness is normal. The richness of our own neighborhood is the exception.
Then it zooms back in on the couple. In just under 10 minutes we get a full scope of the entire universe. This was the moment Sato had his mind set. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to make it into the film industry.
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
He did not make it. In the film industry, that is. But a senior classmate of his persuaded him into becoming an animator instead.
I had this wishful thinking that if I were to make my own film, I could learn to direct on my own.
For somebody as novice as Sato at this time, anime served him pretty well. He showed a lot of promise early on that proved his capabilities as a director. It may not have been live action like he originally envisioned, but he saw animation as an opportunity to still follow his ambitions and achieve his wish of becoming a filmmaker. And fulfill that wish, he did. Prince of Darkness, the sequel film to Nadesico, shows an immense amount of talent on display. It's beautiful, action-packed, and super engaging, with the only problem being that the ending leaves a lot to be desired. Without spoiling what happens, it leaves on a cliffhanger that was never resolved. There was no sequel anime to Prince of Darkness, and while it is a shame that Nadesico never got a proper conclusion, Cat Soup would stick the landing with effortless grace. The year is 2003. You're watching Full Metal Panic Fumofu to drown out the inner turmoil you feel awaiting the next volume of Mermaid Melody. When suddenly, you remember the big event. Big Apple Anime Fest is about to start, a stupid name for a convention that would turn out to be an unforgettable experience. The guests include the likes of Takeshi Koike, Takashi Nakamura, and the legendary Satoshi Kon. His latest masterpiece, Tokyo Godfathers, had its international premiere at this convention, and so did Cat Soup. Having your movie next to a Satoshi Kon classic may seem intimidating, but there was actually a lot of fanfare from the crowd. It's a fun movie to watch with your friends as you try to piece together the story. The lack of dialogue was also a smart move for the widespread appeal of this film. But of course, that wasn't the only factor though, as another person on the team would go on to become an international superstar.
It's not very sexy to go that far up somebody's bum.
Hold on, let's back up a bit. Now, it isn't a secret to any hardcore fan of Masaaki Yuasa that he was heavily involved with Cat Soup, but what few people talk about is how exactly he got to this point. What you may not know is that before the likes of Mind Game and Kemonozume, he would primarily work on kids shows as a key animator. If you like Crayon Shin-chan, it's likely you've seen his cuts in some of the movies. He also worked on Chibi Maruko-chan. If you want to see what is basically a proto-Yuasa film, then check out My Favorite Song. It's an incredible film, although it does raise the question, just how did Yuasa go from this to Kemonozume? Admittedly, his work in both fields are pretty stylistically similar with how things are animated, but that's not the only thing to remain intact. Yuasa has always valued mass market appeal. He wants his anime to be enjoyed by as many people as possible, which may seem like a contradiction considering where he started and where he is now. Well, it turns out that Cat Soup would act as a sort of bridging point in Yuasa's career. From here on out, Masaaki Yuasa would not only step up from key animator to director, but also gain worldwide acclaim and become one of modern anime's defining voices. In other words, I'd say he achieved his wish, and then some.
I have to admit, I had my misgivings about doing something so cultish, but I was pleased with the results and learned a lot from it that I was able to use in this film. It showed me that it was okay to do certain things, and in that sense, it made it a lot easier to make Mind Game.
Yuasa and Sato were both pretty close together during the making of the film and proved instrumental into making Cat Soup a visual feast. But what about the actual instruments behind it? Sato brought on Yutaro Tejikai as composer for the movie. He is perhaps most well known for his work with the legendary Shigeru Tamura. Tejikai's music sets a poetic tone for Tamura's surreal worlds. Glassy Ocean in particular draws a lot of its emotional strength from the music. It would only make sense to bring this guy on board to breathe life into the melancholic world of Cat Soup. And while the collaboration between Sato and Yuasa brought out the best in each other, Teshikai was essentially left on his own with very little direction being given. "Make something beautiful," Sato said, and so Teshikai delivered, but it wasn't without its difficulties. Cat Soup was a movie made rather sporadically, with the team coming up with ideas as they went. So let's take a closer look at how it all came together. The early 2000s were a time of wild experimentation. Digital animation made it possible for many studios to take on projects which otherwise would have been too expensive or complicated with cell animation. Cat Soup is no different. It takes full advantage of it being a digital production, which made it a rather progressive title at the time. Even so, it's a miracle it came into fruition at all. But a producer at King's Records was a fan of the original manga and wanted to see it adapted into a film. He said no one else could do it, which motivated Sato into happily accepting the project. Though it wasn't the first adaptation, nor the last. In 1999, there was a TV series based on the same manga. It differentiates itself from the OVA by having real voice acting, and it's actually pretty good. It's also more of a comedy than the OVA and is similar to something you'd find on Newgrounds. So if you enjoy living inside your gym shoes, definitely check it out because this show stinks. If you don't, then there's always the CD-ROM version. These are not only incredibly rare, but also noteworthy for being the only media to contain 3D models of the characters. This makes each adaptation of Cat Soup special and unique in its own right, but what's inside the disc itself? It's more or less just random chapters from the manga with goofy music and sound effects added. The interesting parts come from the 3D animated cutscenes, some of which appear in the OVA, and others don't, and are original. But what's even more interesting than that is what's inside the packaging. A leaflet that advertises some sort of Midori CD-ROM. How peculiar, I wonder what kind of correlations they have. Unfortunately, this one of Midori is even more rare and you'd be hard-pressed to find any information or even photos of it online. That is, until now. This one comes with the same ad, and all of these ROMs also share the same text on the bottom right corner of the packaging. If you don't speak Japanese, don't worry, there's a video file on the ROM itself which tells us that it stands for Garo. More specifically, this is the digital Garo series. It wasn't uncommon for old magazines to come with CDs, but there's a lot more here than meets the eye, so let's have a look at the real deal. Garo was first and foremost a manga magazine. What makes Garo stand out from the likes of Ribbon and Shonen Jump is that it lacks a target gender and age demographic. Instead, Garo aims to deliver niche and alternative works that appeal to the anti-establishment. Crude artwork, taboo themes, and foul language are heavily present in the magazine. Checks all the boxes for a certain series we all know, but I would like to shed some spotlight on a few other notable talents before talking about the creator behind Cat Soup. Creator of Midori, Suehiro Maruo, is one of the most popular. He originally tried getting into Shonen Jump, but got rejected due to the graphic nature of his manga. Garo was the outlet he needed to express himself without limitations, which then later led to a young Hiroshi Harada wanting to adapt his Ero Guro masterpiece into a film. And the rest is history. Nishioki Kyodai deserves a mention for being a duo between a brother and a sister with a style that's unmatched. They're great. Hajime Yamano is somebody you don't hear mentioned very often but has an incredible sense of imagination and vision to explore his ideas. And, this one is special to me, Mother series creator Shigesato Itoi spoke about Garo in a 1997 documentary about the magazine. I was starstruck when I found out about this, but before I get ahead of myself, let's get back to Cat Soup and its place in this magazine. Nekojiru Udon debuted in Garo in 1990, meaning that Cat Soup was just a name they came up with for the OVA because all of the other names they had planned were total garbage. Nekojiru D. Plant. Noodles. Flour. What the fuck? Nekojiru Udon is unique for many reasons. The first thing is obviously its art style, which is simplistic yet instantly recognizable. Second thing, the general tone and attitude. It has its moments of sheer brutality, which is captured in the TV series, but it's also not quite on the same level as other manga featured in Garo. In a way, this makes it easier to digest while capturing the spirit of Garo and could potentially act as a gateway to ease you into the rest of the magazine's content. Third is the creator, Shiyumi Hashiguchi, better known by her pen name Nekojiru. And even though she named the series after herself, she wasn't always a mangaka. Let's set the stage and take a closer look. Nekojiru actually started out as a beautician before transitioning into the field of manga. How or why, we don't actually know. The truth of the matter is that she's a bit of an anomaly with very little known about her. But what we do know is that she was apparently very true to her manga. In an interview with her brother, he said that she was a very loud and rowdy person in real life. Despite that, however, she was still very kind to him, so while she has her soft spots, we can clearly tell that her writing style comes from a place of authenticity. Great storytelling often comes from personal experience, and Nekojiru is very personal, as anyone working in Garo should be. Getting something published is hard enough in the first place, but when you're making niche art, you better make sure you have the ability to reach your intended audience. Nekojiru most certainly had it in her, but there was a problem. She didn't know how to draw. This is where Hajime Yamano steps in. He may not have been the most popular export from Garo, but in Japan he saw himself garnering a bit of a cult fanbase. And among those people were none other than Nekojiru. In fact, after reading Dream Island, she felt a spark of passion to want to work alongside Yamano. However, due to the complexity of Yamano's detailed horror against Nekojiru's childish scribbles, he quickly came to realize that working alongside her would not be possible due to this great contrast in skill. Yamano suggested that instead of trying to help out with his own manga, that she should make her own manga instead, and he could help with the compositions. This small exchange would lead into an entire franchise being created. This was not only beneficial to Nekojiru and Yamano, but also Garo as a whole, which was at the height of its popularity in the early 70s, but had crashed in the mid-80s. The magazine was ultimately discontinued in 2002, but I bet it would have been gone sooner if it were not for the likes of Nekojiru. So, how successful was it exactly? You'd be surprised. While it may look like a cultish series on the surface, Nekojiru was actually a big deal at the time. She was one of the progenitors of Kimo Kawaii, the act of making something that's both cutesy and gross at the same time. Young girls at the time were fond of this aesthetic choice, saying how it felt real and that it was cute with a nefarious nature to it. There's also one more factor that I think is important, and that is the character designs themselves. Mori Chak, creator of Gloomy Bear, once said, "Even if you don't speak the same language, characters can be universal," and this rings true for Nekojiru's designs. They have a very simple and minimalistic appeal to them, similar to a Sanrio creation like Hello Kitty or My Melody. They're both cute and easy to draw, which makes them appealing even if you don't know the source material or you dislike the cool themes. These types of designs are not easy to make. Creating something that is both minimal and universal is one thing. Making it scary and cute at the same time, however, is another thing entirely. Nekojiru must have been some sort of secret mastermind, but in reality, she was less than pleased with this newfound attention that she was receiving. While successful, she would spend most of her time alone and didn't have any friends or people she would even call friends for that matter. Those who interviewed her at the time claimed that she would barely even make eye contact. For people like this, expression through art can be a necessary outlet to convey your thoughts and feelings. It's how some artists can explore fantastical ideas or stay young by projecting the nostalgia of youth onto paper. Nekojiru, on the other hand, takes an interesting approach in a chapter that I consider to be her best work. It's titled Invisible. Invisible tells us a lot about Nekojiru's current mental state. To turn invisible is a wish to escape from the public eye into your own world. The clown plays an important role in showing her this new world, and thus mimicking reality. The parallel here is Hajime Yamano. It was always her dream to work with him, and upon achieving that dream they soon became wife and husband. Beyond marriage, Nekojiru also wanted to move to India. Her course of action at this point was likely to save up enough money from her job as a mangaka to move out of Japan with her husband and live a peaceful life. But then, something terrible happened. On May 10th, 1998, Nekojiru committed suicide. Gone without a trace, this came as a shock to the entire industry, who couldn't fathom why she would end her life at the height of her career. But to Yamano and some of her close friends, it seemed more like an inevitability. Near the end of her life, the cynicism and cruelty of her work would begin to take over. But despite her lack of sleep from working and dangerous alcoholic tendencies, she did continue to work up until her final moments. Invisible was a story that Nekojiru had written down, which Yamano later illustrated. Essentially what he did was visualize her suicide note from the roots of her very own words. Yet something doesn't add up, and that's that Nekojiru clearly still had dreams, which should have signified some sort of will to live. But consider this. So there's this Nirvana interview in which the song Scentless Apprentice is brought up. It was the first song where they all collaborated on the writing of the song. When asked if this trend would continue, Kurt says,
"Hell yes. Takes the pressure off of me."
But not too long after this interview, Kurt would shoot himself. This also sent shockwaves through the industry and fandom, but one question always persisted, and that's why. In hindsight, we can look back and maybe find a few hints here and there.
Most people think that if I look at them and I don't smile, that I'm pissed off, so I go out of my way to make it look like I'm enjoying myself, you know.
However, it is ultimately futile to try and find answers. The burning passion and curiosity for what could have been hurts to think about, but no amount of research or conspiracy theories is going to change the fact that he's gone. Sometimes it can be so easy to get caught up in these selfish consumerist tendencies that we forget about the people behind the art. Some artists dedicate their lives to a single project which may or may not be completed in their lifetime. It's sad to think about, isn't it? I'm sure you can think of many who never got to complete their one masterpiece, because I know I can. This is why you need to set realistic expectations for yourself, both as a creator and consumer. It is not healthy to have astronomical standards and set yourself up for disappointment. We only have so much time to live, which means we need to cherish what we have when we're alive, and live to tell the tale. From here on out, we can always go forward, but never turn back. And this is why Cat Soup is such a great adaptation. The movie itself is not as much a straightforward adaptation, but rather inspired by Nekojiru's life and a showcase of what we can learn from it. Video Store Magazine may have called it Hello Kitty on acid, but the animation team would not go down the same route. They animated everything whilst completely sober and off drugs, because you don't need to ruin your life in order to make great art. Any instance of cruelty in the film is done in the act of survival, showing some hope from Nekojiru's perspective as she was making her manga. Try as they might, but Nyako and Nyata cannot revert time and space. They tried, and it ended with their family disappearing along with their memories of them. They are left with nobody but themselves for a brief moment until the very end. It's a melancholic ending, but one that respects her decision nonetheless and makes for a good contrast with its theme of reincarnation. This is what makes the ending so powerful. The passage of time and cycle of life symbolize natural human evolution. Without past generations, not only would we not exist, but our perception of reality as we know it would be completely different. It's easy to get caught up in the mundane when you think about life in a vacuum, but look at the bigger picture and we are but a mere flash in the great wide open of the cosmos. Perhaps the roots of nihilism is realizing just how small we really are and the fact that we may not achieve all of our goals in life. But for some other people, having great aspirations is a distraction to the existentialism of human mortality. Yuasa and Sato are two such people who have not only gone on to entertain people around the globe, but also help portray anime as a more respectable art form to outsider circles, and thus opening up a new world for people who didn't know they really wanted it. And that leaves us with Hajime Yamano, who thankfully has also seen the light at the end of the tunnel. Confused and shocked as he was at first, he no longer questions the passing of his wife. There is simply nothing that can be done about it now, and the quicker you reach the stage of acceptance, the better. But her death was not in vain. Yamano has since continued making new Nekojiru manga under the pen name Nekojiru Y. Her influence continues to inspire the modern Kimo Kawaii art style that's gotten more popular recently with the aforementioned Gloomy Bear and the smash hit that is Madoka Magica, the latter of which has introduced a new generation to a fresh take on her style, further exploring the aesthetic and storytelling potential of it. Her impact simply cannot be ignored and should not be understated. Cats may have 9 lives, but as long as we acknowledge her existence, she will be forever. And who knows, maybe Nekojiru and Yamano are still spiritually connected with each other beyond the boundaries of physical existence. But for the rest of us, the memory of her will still remain in our still beating hearts. Until the day comes for us to enter her realm. Someday when my heart stops beating, I'll meet you, Shiyumi Hashiguchi.
Grab your chance, otherwise time won't wait, it always flies. Life is flashing before your eyes. So live it up, idealize, don't stop to compromise. Life just keeps on flashing before your eyes. Cauliflower clouds, starry skies. Life is flashing before your eyes. Just like butterflies, or the key to paradise. Life's out there flashing before your eyes. Of life will synchronize with the animated energy of surprise. Life's right there in front of your eyes. Cherries in a bowl satisfy your thirst for life will not run dry. I said life keeps on flashing before your eyes. To philosophize between 2 eternities, I realize my life is flashing before my eyes. It's just a dream, and my advice is don't neglect to have a nice life flash before your eyes. Have a nice life flash before your eyes.